Hi there, and welcome to Peninsula Players Presents the history of Peninsula Players Theatre. And today we're going to cover the year 1952, and I'm here again with Audie. Hello, Audie.
Greg.
But before we jump into this, I just want to quickly ask Audie something, which is how did you get interested in Peninsula Players history, and where did that come
Where
from?
did it come from? Okay. Um, when I arrived at Peninsula Players, I was a fresh newlywed and graduate from college, and my favorite class was theater history. And I would sit down and have lunch with Bob and Margaret because they were a married couple, Bob Thompson, and had a long career in the arts. And I was my husband and I, Scott, he was also in technical theater. So I wanted to know how they managed to have such a beautiful relationship that long because I'd sit down and talk to them all the time. And I learned through those conversations that Bob actually had been in Duluth, where I was going to school and grew up in 1935.
Huh.
And so I was fascinated that he was performing in where an area I grew up in a summer theater program that I knew nothing about. And I was returning to graduate school after that season. So I returned to the area and I was looking for information on theater at that time when Bob was there, and I couldn't find anything. Nobody had compiled anything. So that became my focus for my master's thesis. And I spent 2 years researching the history of arts and entertainment in Superior, Wisconsin from 1865 to 1900.
Uh-huh.
And so that sparked my interest of finding all these vaudeville houses and opera houses that don't exist anymore in the area. They've either been burned down or torn down, and the rich history that was here at the turn of the century that didn't exist after World War II.
I see. So, but also as an undergrad, your degree was in what?
Technical theater.
Technical theater. But didn't you also study um, other
Oh,
stuff?
I did, because I it was a liberal arts program at UW Superior. So I was editor of the campus newspaper. I was a scene shop technician working on scenery and lighting and stage management and working at the campus radio station. And when I went back to work on my master's, your major, you had a major focus that would write on for your thesis, but then you also had a minor. And so I took library research classes and reference classes because I thought, you know what, I like research. I like looking up historical facts. And that has really come helpful for writing about history within the shows in and of themselves, being marketing and PR, is doing the research to find out about playwrights and like
Yeah.
dramaturgy and that
So
stuff. So
you learned how to dig.
I learned how to dig and I loved it.
I see.
And then I returned to Peninsula Players in 93 after Tom Birmingham had passed away. And it was from Tom and Bob that I was learning all of the history and backstories. And knowing that Tom had passed really spurred me to make sure that the history of the players was captured and not lost in time as um, my hometown, the area that I was going to school in was. So
And so now we're reaping the benefits of all of that
exactly. And
background.
it just makes me curious, and
Yes.
I don't find it work.
No, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. So let's jump into
Okay.
this period. So at the end of 1951, that was the last season that the theater did rep,
Mhm.
and it was very ambitious because of Richard Fisher. And we talked about how people during this time were spreading their wings. And Richard, Wright, went to
Richard, yes, and particularly Richard. So the theater started by the Fisher family and having Mama and Papa and the three kids there. It's now almost 18, 19 years later. And in development, television has now sprung up, this new entertainment format. And when Richard goes to New York, he gets involved with the George Burns and Gracie Allen show, and he becomes the assistant to Ralph Levy, who is this amazing television producer. And he directed the pilot episode of I Love Lucy. He was producing George Burns and Gracie Allen, and he was also a producer of the Jack Benny show. and directing episodes. And so when we say Richard's star was climbing in television, he was connected, and he was to this production team to do all of these shows. So he really couldn't get away. He was in New York, and George Burns decided that filming his program would be better so that they could syndicate it. So they then moved to Hollywood. So now Richard's in California along with Margo. And then that's where Mama and Papa go in the winters as well, because two of their kids are there. So.
And all of this to mention because it affected how things progressed with Peninsula Players.
Exactly.
And who came in to fill in the gaps in Richard's absence.
Right. And usually it was Leo. Leo would pick up those reins to help hire the apprentices and all of that. But he's spreading his own wings in other projects that he's gotten involved in. So he's not available to do
And
that.
he's in St. Louis at the Empress, right?
He's gotten connected with another stock company that's a star venue that started there. So it's the St. Louis Civic Theater out of the Empress Theater as their performance space. And every week they bring in a different star. So it varies from such performers as Vincent Price to Judy Holliday, who was Billy in Born Yesterday. And all of these other Gene Lockhart and June Lockhart and all. So they'd come in once a week and do shows. And then Leo also was also being cast in productions in New York. So he was just becoming more popular as a leading man. And
I think he was in a production of Born Yesterday.
Yes, he was.
With William Bendix.
Yeah. Yes, The Life of Riley.
So, so again, Leo's spreading his wings, and this affects how things go at the Players. And Caroline, she doesn't plan to visit this year because she's busy with the family, right?
Right. That's kind of her announcement that she makes at the beginning of the season, is that she's just tied up being a mom and taking care of the three kids. And Margot's in California taking care of her family and still battling smog. She's really focused on that, but Mama's around. She's, still designing the costumes and putting that talent to work. And over the course of the 18-19 season, she's designed and crafted more than 500 costumes, from Greek to contemporary to spacesuits. She just has done the gamut.
She was quite experienced, and she has a strong background in that.
She does. She was a graduate of the Pratt School of Design in New York and had worked with some other designers of costume before getting married. And so she has a real drive for this, and really was encouraging of her children in the performing arts and classical music. She was an avid listener to music, and Bob Thompson, remember, she had one of the most state-of-the-art Victrolas that she would listen to in the house, and there'd be classical music playing all of the time.
So Caroline is in Redding, Connecticut with her family, though she does visit, I think, June 17th. I think you found out.
Yeah, she does, because the family comes. There's a time when Richard gets vacation at some point and does return.
So before we get into a little more specific about going into the 52 season, very briefly, just because this affects the Players, the TV was it was shifting from live to filmed, right?
Right. Yes.
And sitcoms were becoming popular.
They were, and it was becoming more of that type of television entertainment as to the Philco Star Theater or the Texaco Star Theater, where plays would be. They still were, but they weren't falling into the top 10 shows of the year. It was more I Love Lucy and Gunsmoke and some of those other stories.
And interestingly enough, this was the year that the Today Show premiered on NBC. And in theater,
we had The Mousetrap opened. So for Agatha Christie fans,
And
and
still running.
still,
Well,
yes,
not at the moment,
yeah.
but it has been.
It took a pandemic to close it.
Yeah.
As well as Pell Joey and Kiss Me Kate,
Mm-hmm.
and High Noon and Limelight were at the movie theaters, and Ernest Hemingway had won the Pulitzer Prize for The Old Man in the Sea.
I see. And one other thing of note that I wanted to mention, that a song that came out that year was "I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus,"
Right.
and it was released for some reason on July 15th.
So,
So as we're going into the 1952 season and preparing for it, Caroline brings Jim McKenzie in as resident manager.
right. Since she's not able to come back, Jim, who has now got 10 years of theater under his belt, and has graduated and just completed his master's at Columbia, Caroline has always trusted him, and he kind of becomes her protege in managing the theater. So she asks Jim to come back and be the resident manager. So he's moving from a stage manager position to this, but he has gained a lot of experience in those 10 years, from being involved with NBC television and helping produce more than 300 television programs.
Mm.
He ran his own advertising agency in Iowa while he was going to school. And he also worked in dramatics, just helping to produce, build, carpentry, stage management, and all of that, while also raising a family. So he's now married now and has, I believe David is
Their
his son,
son.
David.
And he's
Yes.
married to Jean Bolin, an actress, and Jean also returns
Right.
with him this year.
And Jean at the time is also being managed by a very prestigious agency in New York who is associated with Uta Hagen. So there's some really prominence within there as well with Jean's talent. And
Uta Hagen being a name we've heard before.
Mhm.
And also, and then a lot of this has to do with Richard Fisher being in Hollywood. Caroline brings in William Stigel.
He does, yes. And William has an interesting history himself, but he's um, with Sam Wanamaker in the Woodstock summer stock company. So he's been involved in summer stock theaters elsewhere in other places. And
Mm-hmm.
he's also a teacher at the Goodman and has directed productions at the Goodman. And he's also a POW survivor. He has a real World War II history to share in his training and surviving as a POW as well.
So Caroline brings him in as the first guest
The
director.
first guest director. So because Leo's not there at the start of the season to help direct the shows, but or to help hire the interns or interview them, and Richard's busy in television, so Bill helps fill that role of selecting the season, getting some of those interns set up, as well as directing the plays and maybe alternating responsibilities with someone else in the company for that. But there's a variety of things that have to. So in essence, we move from Richard and Caroline as a team to Caroline hiring Jim and Bill to serve as this team in 1952.
And also Ted Bird comes back along
Mhm.
with Jim Moronic. And Jim has graduated from the Goodman, right?
Yes, he's now got more than 30 professional shows under his paintbrush.
He's a very talented paintbrush. And this is also going into this season for the first time a house manager is added.
Right. So with, and this could be something that Jim McKenzie had thought of. So they put in the staff position of a house manager who can help Edith in the box office during the day. They also cast him in small parts throughout the season, and he house manages before the show, and then if he has a bit, he runs backstage to take care of that. And Edith also arrives earlier that season because Richard's not around to help get the gardens set up. That's now become her responsibility as well. So within this company atmosphere, everybody is juggling different hats
Mm-hmm.
and doing different things. And even Sid Searcher, who returns, is now taken on the responsibility of advertising. So he
See,
So they really are, all of it. It's a labor of love for all of the returnees to do whatever needs to be done.
A real team effort,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah. So we get into the 52 season, which comprised 9 shows, one a week from July 1st to August 31st.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there's no shows on Monday,
Right. That's,
which
yep,
is,
that's, they started that. So there's no shows on Monday. Correct.
and they run Tuesday through Sunday, which is what we are now.
Mhm.
And these longer runs were actually requested.
They were either patrons of either Cottage Row or hotel resort owners who have people with the length of their stay. They said, we'd like this a week of length of shows. So that was when they were publicizing why the schedule shift. That was one of the reasons they gave, was it was requested.
So we open with The Happy Time, opens July 1st, which I believe was the first production of that play after its Broadway run.
Correct. They had gotten special negotiation rights to be the first theater company off Broadway to produce this show. And when they announced that, they also announced that they had contracted a bus that would run from Sturgeon Bay and stop at certain locations on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Friday nights, so that people who maybe didn't have vehicles, they could carpool up to Peninsula Play, up to the shows that season. And so there was a bus that was going to run from, it had specific stops, and it would stop in Sturgeon Bay at Miller's Clothing Store at 7:30, and it would stop at Institute at 7:45, and then Velmy, and it would also stop at the Alpine and Egg Harbor, and they was 50 cents for a ride. So they had a bus going up and down that season, Wednesday, Thursdays, and Fridays.
And nice. And after the show, they drop them off.
They drop them off. Yes.
Nice. So, so the first show opens, and then we get to the second, Over 21, which is by Ruth Gordon.
By Ruth Gordon. And Ruth has such a lovely theatrical history. She started in theater at the age of 15, and it wasn't the first production that the Players have done by Ruth. And so I found it fascinating. I was like, okay. So I went to look her up, and Ruth was also a Tony-nominated actress for Dolly Levy in The Matchmaker.
By Thornton Wilder.
Yep. And so at 15, she's a dancer. And at age 71, she won an Oscar for her performance in Rosemary's Baby. So here's this, long career, like the Luntz, this long career person. And I loved her acceptance speech. And when she received her Oscar, because she said, I can't tell you how encouraging a thing like this is.
She was a character, apparently. So after Over 21, then the third show, Come Back Little Sheba, opens July 15th, mm-hmm. which, again, that show premiered in 1950. So, again, they are doing brand new stuff.
They are, and they're bringing it to summer audiences, to people who maybe can't get to New York to see them. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the popularities, is they can come up to Door County and see these fresh off-Broadway shows during the summer.
And then, and again, another relatively new show, See How They Run, opens July 22nd, mm-hmm. which I discovered actually opened May 11th of 1949 at the Actors Theatre in Plainfield, New Jersey, which was funny to me because I lived in Plainfield for a few years.
And that it's a British farce. It's,
very funny. And then somewhere in here, in this season, Leo Lucker mm-hmm. Did his 1000th performance.
Somewhere within it. I couldn't pinpoint when, but that was a really big deal. It's just like Bill Munchow and Casey Bragdon. They've been there for a long time. And Leo, with his prominent being the leading man for as long as he was, we never do find out which one was his 1000th performance, but that's a big number and impressive.
Very, very.
And he continues to perform for several seasons.
Yeah. And then we open The Voice of the Turtle July 29th, and Jean Sincere returns.
She did, and Voice of the Turtle wasn't on the original playbill. So this is where they have the playbill subject to change comes in. They had scheduled to do Goodbye Again, but Jean calls up and says, you know what? I have some vacation time coming to me. I'm going to come to Door County. What can we do? And that's what they pulled out of their hat.
And because he was in New York and found that she had some time.
Yes.
And then after that, The Silver Whistle opened August 5th. Which again premiered in November of '48 in New York with Jose Ferrer, a name we've heard before.
And these past two shows were really well received by critics. So The Silver Whistle is kind of a nice story about a vagabond who enters a nursing home under cons his way in to get free room and board, but he enlightens their lives. And they really loved Bill Munchel's performance as this character. And one of the lines within the show was, you've all forgotten how to play a silver whistle. And so he wants to bring their childhood youth and joy and enthusiasm back to them. And critics liked that performance. And they also were really encouraging of The Voice of the Turtle because Casey, Leo, Jean, and a newcomer that year, Ken McEwen, were in it. And they said within the drama of the human frailties of that performance, they were very sensitively acted by those four. So, you know, there's quality within the work that they're doing.
Yes. And then Peg of My Heart opens August 12th.
Yes.
And
that one it's been very popular across the country, and a very Pollyanna type of story about an Irish waif who gets adopted or cared for by these aristocrats who are a little, just stuck up, but their hearts warm to her and they realize there's more to life and to love. And they bring back J. Williams Macy for this production as well. And the one thing that the reviewer commented on in regards to this was the first time he had ever seen 4 curtain calls at a performance at Peninsula Players. And so he assumed that there was an equity rule that they could only have 3. And so he had written about that. But now I'm beginning to wonder, because now we know Jim Moronic was pulling that curtain, if he just wanted to get back to painting.
I see.
Have a cup of coffee.
I see.
So, but he let them have 4 that night.
And that was Chan Harris who reviewed that.
Yes.
And you mentioned J. Williams Macy being in that show. And he had, his boys were apprentices, right?
They were throughout the time that they were there, or each of his sons were apprentices at one time or another with the company. So I just thought that was fascinating that family loved the arts so much that they were there doing that, and as well as Dad. And
so after Peg of My Heart, Remains to Be Seen opens August 19th, and that sounds like an interesting show.
It was had undertakers and jazz musicians and dead bodies, and it was kind of a la Arsenic and Old Lace, and a comedy. So it was kind of a macabre thing, and they had a doctor actually playing a doctor in that. So the first year that Milton Kalian, I believe is how his last name is said, was a summer resident in Ephraim, and he was a retired doctor. And this is the doctor that Jim introduced us to in his interview last week, was Dr. Milt, and he was playing a doctor.
And Milton Kalian was a dietitian who, as Jim mentioned in the last interview, gave talks about nutrition to the company during the time he was there. And
he retired from practicing medicine in LA and was signed on. He wanted to join the Players because he was interested in theater, and he was planning on starting a theater group in Florida in the winter. So he really wanted to know how things worked. And there's just really fascinating, and involved with the Peninsula Players from that season on.
And before we leave, remains to be seen. I think Papa Fisher had something to do with that one,
He
right?
did. He had a little role as a porter, and he would serenade the audience with "On Top of Old Smoky" as he went about.
I see. Wish we could have been there. And then we get to the closing show of the season, Glad Tidings, which opened August 26th, and Leo Lucker directs that. And Margot returned.
Margot returned for that one. There was a role for her to play a Hollywood starlet. And Glad Tidings by the Green Bay Press Gazette was called Adult and Racy.
Mm.
And that was because Margot's character was an unwed starlet who had a 19-year-old teenage daughter that she was introducing to her father for the first time the day before his wedding to another woman.
I
So
see.
that was the Glad Tidings, was
Racy.
and yeah, Racy.
And it was during that show that Caroline Fisher was back on property briefly.
Briefly, yes, and she was there to help close things down. So
And then after the season was over, the Rathbones, Caroline, Rhodian, and family stayed in Door County for the winter.
they did, and they lived in the house on the property. And Heloise remembers her mom cooking on a wood stove, so she would prepare the meals, and they lived in the house. And your office, Greg, which was a residential cabin where we would house people, I lived there for a few seasons as well, above the office. And
Hmm.
I was always tickled when Heloise would come to visit and tell me how cold that cabin was in the winter, and that she stayed up there, and that was her and Dunia's room. And so it was just fascinating to hear that. And the girls enrolled in school, and so they went to school at Gibraltar that winter.
And they were in third and fifth
They were in
grade.
fifth grade, and Rhodian was still flying. So he would travel. He had no qualms. That was just what he did. He would continue his flights out of either Chicago to wherever he needed to fly to, and then would return home to see his family. And Caroline raised the girls there that winter.
And
Rhodian.
also in October around this time, Carolyn was involved with the Peninsula Music Festival.
She was, and it was at a meeting in October that at the Peninsula Arts Association, where several people spoke about the importance of starting a music festival each summer. And Caroline was very vocal about that and very encouraging. And it was at that meeting that it was voted yes to do that and to start selling subscriptions. And then, so the next season is when the Peninsula Musical Festival starts.
I see.
But
And
being a lover of classical music, she was very encouraging of that.
so Caroline kept busy while she stayed up there during the winter. She also judged a high school play competition.
She did, yes.
And Leo Lucker and Edith Dunn visited.
They came up for Christmas, and they had a Dark Money Christmas. It was
So we will finish there. Thank you again, Audie.
well, thank you, Greg.
And we will see you next time. Take care.